Iraq is descending into chaos, but not for the reasons you're being fed by the politicians and the mainstream media. In June of 2014, the world watched in shock as an Islamic militant group operating under the name of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, took control of Mosul, Baiji, and Tikrit and began pushing south to Baghdad. Fallujah has been under their control since January. Iraqi military and police put up very little resistance in spite of the fact that they greatly outnumbered the militants. Most fled their posts and left their uniforms and weapons behind. Those who didn't were killed. ISIS, whose stated goal is to erase the border between Syria and Iraq, to establish an Islamic caliphate encompassing both countries, and to impose Sharia law, already holds vast swaths of territory, and they are rapidly gaining ground. How did this happen? That's an extremely important question. How you answer it will determine what comes next, not just in Iraq. That's why the media spin doctors and politicians are out in force, attempting to rewrite history and turning reality completely on its head in the process. For example, we have people insisting that this is happening because the US and NATO failed to intervene in Syria. Well, that's a convenient answer, isn't it? The US and NATO have been actively working to topple Assad by arming and funding the Syrian rebels since at least 2011. This has developed into a bloody civil war which has attracted jihadists from all over the world. It has also created a vacuum of power which enabled groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Nusra to organize and establish physical strongholds. The US claims to only be arming the moderate rebels. However, the leadership of the Free Syrian Army, aka the FSA, has stated that they regularly carry out joint operations with Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. Up until recently, ISIS was a branch of Al-Qaeda. In February of this year, Al-Qaeda's official leadership publicly disavowed ISIS due to their brutal tactics. That's why ISIS is referred to as a splinter group. Furthermore, we know for a fact that the majority of the weapons and funding from the US and its allies are ending up in the hands of jihadists. And US officials have been aware of this since 2012. But don't take my word for it. Go read this article from the New York Times yourself. Do the math, folks. ISIS would have never gotten a foothold in Syria if the US hadn't weakened the Syrian government. And the weapons that they're using right now were most likely paid for with your tax dollars. But wait, this isn't just about Syria, is it? It's also about Iraq. Which brings us to the other deranged narrative that's being promoted right now. That this chaos is unfolding because the US military withdrew prematurely in 2011. You see, Iraq is in ruins and unable to defend itself because the US military left the party too early. It's not because the Bush administration and the mainstream media convinced the public that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and was planning to use them. No, and it's not because the US invaded Iraq under these false pretenses, disbanding the Iraqi army and police and reducing the country to rubble in an attempt to put down the resulting insurgency. No, it's because 8 years of military occupation wasn't enough. Those who fought there, it's a punch in the gut to see your sacrifice was for nothing. But the occupation of Iraq was never going to end well. And the Bush administration knew that it wouldn't. But don't take my word for it. Let's take a look at this clip, Dick Cheney, from 1994.
Do you think that the U.S. or UN forces should have moved into Baghdad?
No.
Why not?
Because if we'd gone to Baghdad, we would have been all alone. There wouldn't have been anybody else with us. It would have been a U.S. occupation of Iraq. None of the Arab forces that were willing to fight with us in Kuwait were willing to invade Iraq. Once you got to Iraq and took it over, and took down Saddam Hussein's government, then what are you going to put in its place? That's a very volatile part of the world, and if you take down the central government in Iraq, you can easily end up seeing pieces of Iraq fly off. Part of it the Syrians would like to have to the west. Part of eastern Iraq, the Iranians would like to claim, fought over for 8 years. In the north, you've got the Kurds, and if the Kurds spin loose and join with the Kurds in Turkey, then you threaten the territorial integrity of Turkey. It's a quagmire if you go that far and try to take over Iraq.
That was very astute, Dick. You accurately predicted the mess that you were going to help create in 2003. I would even venture to say that your predictions were more accurate than those who warned against this adventure. I'm impressed. Now you'll notice that the talking heads of the left and the right are both trying to frame this crisis as the fault of the other side. They're both right. Both sides of the aisle have blood on their hands, and this goes way beyond Bush and Obama. The United States has been tinkering in Iraq for a long, long time. In fact, it was the CIA that put Saddam in power in 1963. Don't take my word for it. Go read this article from the New York Times. The US government also backed Saddam in 1980 when he launched a war of aggression against Iran, even though they knew he was using chemical weapons. But again, don't take my word for it. Go read this article by Foreign Policy magazine. Fast forward to 1990. Saddam Hussein was embroiled with Kuwait over oil prices and borders, and he was preparing to take action. Given America's support in the war against Iran, Saddam had no reason to believe that Kuwait would be any different. But just to be sure, he decided to consult with Washington first. On July 25th of 1990, U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, April Glaspie, met with Saddam Hussein. In the meeting, Saddam described his case against Kuwait and told Glaspie that he viewed their activities as an act of military aggression. Glaspie responded by saying, quote, "We have no opinion on Arab-Arab conflicts like your border disagreement with Kuwait." And she reinforced this by saying, "This issue is not associated with America." Naturally, Saddam interpreted this as a green light. And 8 days later, he invaded. Later, when questioned in hearings, Glaspie claimed that though this quote was accurate, she had followed it up by insisting that Iraq settle its dispute nonviolently.
Did you say we have no opinion on the Arab-Arab conflicts, like your border disagreement with Kuwait?
Yes, that was one part of my sentence. The other part of my sentence was, but we insist that you settle your disputes with Kuwait non-violently.
However, that's not what shows up in the transcripts of the conversation released by the New York Times. According to the transcript, what she actually said was, "All that we hope is that these issues are solved quickly." But maybe this was just an innocent diplomatic blunder, right? Well, not quite. As soon as Saddam entered Kuwait, the US government launched a very interesting propaganda campaign to build up public support for a war. They claimed that Iraqi troops were slaughtering little babies by throwing them out of their incubators in hospitals. And they brought in teary-eyed witnesses who testified to having seen the massacre.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers coming to the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
I myself buried 14 newborn babies that had been taken from their incubators.
Kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Just one little problem. The entire event was fabricated. It never happened. This woman who presented herself as a witness was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, and her testimony was part of a public relations campaign organized by a company called Hill and Knowlton. Once public support for the war was strong, the incubator story was dropped, never mentioned again. The U.S. invaded Iraq in 1991. During that war, the U.S. military utilized approximately 640,000 pounds of depleted uranium ammunition. Iraq was decimated, but the U.S. left Saddam in power. The war didn't ever really end, though. The U.S. kept Iraq under a draconian sanctions regime that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of children. Clinton kept those sanctions in place for the entire duration of his presidency, and they knew what was happening.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
You know how they say that those who don't know history are destined to repeat it? That's really not an exaggeration. Fast forward to 2003, and the Kuwait incubator story was swapped out for stories of mobile missile silos and yellow cake uranium. And when it turned out that those weapons of mass destruction didn't exist, they acted like it was no big deal. Then of course came Obama, riding in on promises of hope and change. But we saw how Obama toppled Libya in 2011, leaving that nation in utter chaos. We've seen how he's armed and funded the Syrian rebels in an attempt to bring down Assad. Obama is operating from the same playbook. And yes, there is a playbook.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you gotta come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision, we're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq, why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Fortunately, the future is not set in stone. We can influence the outcome, and we already are. We proved that in 2013 when the left and the right dropped their petty bickering and unified against Obama's proposal to use airstrikes against Assad. The pattern of deceit is the same, but this time the people didn't fall for it. The fact that we had the UN investigator Carla Del Ponte come out and say that the Syrian rebels were behind the sarin gas attacks helped. The fact that Putin short-circuited the US diplomatically helped. But the determining factor was the popular resistance, particularly the signs of discontent from within the military. See, the ruling class is very hesitant to take a nation to war. The people and the military strongly oppose it. That's why the first casualty of war is always the truth. What's going on right now in Iraq is horrific. The ISS is already committing atrocities against civilians on a massive scale. Inexplicably, the Obama administration did not provide Iraq with immediate air support, even after the fall of Mosul. I say inexplicably not because I support airstrikes, but because on June 12th, the US military conducted its second drone strike this month in Pakistan. Why would Obama refuse to act in Iraq when civilians are being massacred, while employing drones in Pakistan without hesitation? I'll tell you why. Because the outrage over the atrocities that the ISS is committing may be enough to provide the US government with a backdoor into Syria. You see, it turns out that Obama is considering airstrikes, but not just in Iraq. He wants to extend those strikes into Syria as well. Well, that's convenient, isn't it? Once the US military is able to freely conduct operations in Syrian territory, getting the regime change that they want will be much, much easier. It's the classic formula: problem, reaction, solution. They created the problem, they're letting the public react and build up outrage, and then they're going to propose a solution which will sow the seeds for another generation of conflicts. To short-circuit this pattern, the public needs to come to terms with the cold, hard truth. No matter what the US does at this point, and no matter how long they stay, there is no happy ending to this story. The chaos that we're seeing in this region is the direct result of half a century of US military interventions and covert operations in the Middle East. It's time to acknowledge that bombing for peace doesn't work. Regime change for stability doesn't work. And you can't fix a mistake by repeating it over and over and over. If the US honestly wants to stop the spread of Islamic terrorism, then they should stop funding and arming jihadists in Syria. That would be a good starting point, don't you think? If you want to keep informed about what's going on in the world, go to our website, scgnews.com, and sign up for email updates. Doing so, you'll be notified of any new articles or videos we put out. Also, be sure to subscribe to Storm Clouds Gathering on YouTube, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+.
Going to Iraq, it's a long way from home, and the ones coming back, they're all singing a different song, singing a different song.
Hidden heart of a man is of great price. That's right. And Jesus' sight, they came to speak within to teach us. Unconditional love to everyone, especially those who like to judge. Yeah. Look within, you might be the one holding a grudge. Like a hypocrite, cast the beam out of your own eye, it out so you can see clearly. To pull out the mote that's in your brother's eye, you can't deny. We all do it sometimes. True. And let's bring forth good fruit. Yes. So we can build strong spiritual truths. That's in God's view. That's what He wants us to do. For sure. If those spiritually strong help those that are spiritually weak, and listen to the words that God speaks. Tell us, blessed are the humble and meek.
I'm going to Iraq. It's a long way from home, singing a different song. Singing a different song.
Jesus didn't come for the righteous. Who'd he come for? He came for the sinners. Sat down with them and even ate dinner. What can we say about that? What can we say? It goes to show you where his pure heart was at. Tell me. We could all use a dose of that and put it towards everyday life. Instead of looking at the wrong in each other, start looking at the right. That's the way it ought to be. Yes. Lord, you're our God in life. Help us on the mic, setting them free. I see they're holding so much pain back to bleeding. Please, Lord, take the pain from them. Take it. I feel it now. I know you wanna hold them. Yes, you do. Reach towards the heavens and count your blessings. Lift your voice. No matter how hard it gets, the Lord can take your stresses. To the troops, this one's for you. He hears, he truly hears your confessions.
Going to Iraq. It's a long way from home, and the ones coming back, they're all singing a different song, singing a different song.
Jesus created everything in existence. He laid it upon our heart to send it through. Hoping you don't miss this. Best believe he sees what you're going through. He's reading every inch of you from head to toe. In times like these, we need to join together. Get on our hands and knees and pray, cause our souls grieve. We stand soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, marching in the sand, hand to hand. Yeah, man for man, come on, fighting in the Holy Land. Lord, what's your plan? Tell us, fulfilling scripture. So visualize the picture. The end time is near. If any man have an ear, then shall he hear these soul-moving facts on the spiritual track. Going to Iraq, our Lord is coming back.
I'm going to Iraq. We're going to Iraq. I'm going to Iraq. And the Lord's coming back. And the Lord's coming back. And the Lord's coming back. Little child loves her ring. We take for granted every day. Little children holding hands. Our stress across many lands. prayers are finally answered. Hey, hope is on the way. With gifts of food and plenty. And love we send their way. Well, the more we make it happen, well, the more the job gets done. Please join, you're so important. So they feel that they belong. Yeah, we know. Hey, yeah, that it's wrong when children are longing where their loved ones have gone, where their loved ones have gone. Where have they gone? The shots. Hey, hey, say it all. They're standing in the road, and then they fall, and then they fall. You know what it's like to have to live in such fright all day long, night after night, night after night. Remembering those who've lost the right. Please remember them as your life goes by. As your life goes by. The killing goes on. Village is gone. Can we stop it? Will they try? If we all know it is wrong. If we all know it is wrong. Who says they're right? To walk in the night, hunting down, oh poor souls, who can't even fight, who can't even fight, who can't even fight. Remember those who've lost the right? Please remember them as your life goes by. As your life goes by, please remember all of them. As your life goes by, please remember all of them. As your life goes by, as your life goes by.
Concern's been around for more than 40 years, and it began really as a response to the famine in Biafra. So this was the first time that Irish families sat down and were watching on a black and white television the kind of horrors of what was happening in the Civil War, and children basically dying of starvation. And this was something they'd read about before, but they'd never actually seen. And it created a whole emotional response from the public. They raised a huge amount of money. Everybody wanted to do something. And what they did is they channeled that to people on the ground who were already living there. And so the response basically was effective and it was appropriate. And they saved a huge amount of lives. And that became the DNA. That became the DNA of the organization. Fast response, appropriate response, and a reliance on public support to make the response effective. We work in the poorest countries, and we work in the poorest populations within those countries. And often they are way at the end of a really bad road. It can take 2 days to get there. You know, it's not just about going in to build schools, but Concern, you know, is going deeper than that. And they're saying, even if you put kids in schools, does it mean they're going to have a good education? Putting water in schools, setting up parent-teacher associations, making the mothers involved with their children's education to ensure that children are not just only educated, they're protected. And that's what we do. The bottom line is we're trying to do ourselves out of a job. It's always been about making the public understand that they can be part of something amazing. They can be part of transformation of people's lives. And I think social media is an extension of that for concern. It just really resonates with the philosophy of the organization, which is about reaching out and including people as part of a great mission. We really want to engage more people, you know, through social media, through our donors, through Twitter, through whatever, to say, guys, we are doing great work here and we can't afford to stop.